I'll let you know when it's time. Good afternoon and welcome to United TV. My name is Kemal Erkan. Today is April 4th, 2025. We are going to cover some of our prior topics, but also we have a couple new topics that we are going to be able to cover. And before we actually invite our guest to join us, who's here with me, I do want to give a couple of updates. This May 6 through 8, 2025, in Istanbul, we have the 28th Eurasian Economic Summit. This event right now already with 23 different countries, including one president, 13 former presidents, one royalty, one autonomous governor, 3 speakers, 4 ministers, 7 former prime ministers, and 4 former ministers who's participating. And also one of the Nobel Prize winners, Dr. Aziz Sancar, he's going to be with us on that day, those days, and in Istanbul. So the goal of the event is to make sure that we are able to tackle pressing issues, economic, environmental, and security challenges. And the forum becomes the main platform for all these different countries to be able to share their experience. And this is going to be a very important event, and we'll be participating. Myself and United Medical will be part of that. Now, our second update is from the Senate Bill SB 21. This is already signed and this is signed into law by Governor Matt Meyer. This is an issue that the bill actually addresses the issue of the corporate laws. As many of you are following what was happening before, we want to make sure that we are able to keep this important business for Delaware courts, and this is now in place, and hopefully it will take care of some of the issues as time goes. Now, today is a really important day for me because when we started in, I believe, early 2021, one of the reasons was that we wanted to reach out to our patients during the pandemic. And the other reason was if we wanted to be connected with our employees. And then all of a sudden, this became something bigger than what we were expecting. And today, with 123,000 subscribers, our channel is probably one of the biggest YouTube channel independently owned in Delaware. And one of my dreams was we wanted to add area of expertise, as everyone is following us on our clinical events. I always have a provider, physician, surgeon. On our Bariatric Friday, Dr. Erkan is always with us. And many of the other presentations we have, United Medical Associates doctors and some of the United Medical ACO doctors who joined us. We have our diabetes sessions, and those are run by our nutritionists and dietitians. So one of the things that I was hoping that we would have is having a legal expertise. And Jessica Needles is today here with us. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kemal. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting.
Well, it's like I'm also really excited about this because, you know, when we were discussing many of the legal topics, although I have a really good oversight on these issues, having just like on the clinical issues, when you have a certified bariatric surgeon who's actually talking to you about issues versus now I may be presenting some of the legal issues, but then having a lawyer with us who is able to give us a better, more educated background on these issues. That's going to be really important. And today we would like to focus on 2 topics. But before that, if you can tell us about yourself a little bit, and then we'll start after that.
Sure. So my name is Jessica Needles. I'm an attorney. I work at the law firm Dalton and Associates. It's right here in Wilmington, Delaware. I do civil litigation for the plaintiff's side, primarily with medical malpractice and a little bit of personal injury. And I do a very small amount of asbestos-based work too. And I do want to say that my firm is very happy for me to be here, and they're very supportive. But any opinions that I give today are going to be my opinions and not reflective of Dalton and Associates.
So that's right from the get-go. You already set the tone, right? So that's a legal disclosure, and sometimes I should be actually also saying that for some of my sessions, because if there are any opinions, they are actually my opinions. It's not our company opinions. And thank you for telling us that. Now, you are local in Delaware. Did you go to school here in Delaware as well?
Yes. So I actually worked at my firm as a paralegal for several years, and then I went to night school at the Delaware Law School right over on Concord Pike. And then after I finished, I passed the Pennsylvania bar, then I passed the Delaware bar, and then they promoted me to the position I'm in now.
Very good. And Delaware bar is one of the most difficult ones to pass.
Yes, the Delaware bar is one of the most notoriously difficult bars.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, I want to bring up our first topic, Luigi Magione. This was an extraordinary event. And being here for the last 26 years, and I say this time to time in these shows, why it's important, because I spent half of my life in Turkey. So I have a good background on what's happening in different countries, just because it's very different than here. And there are certain things that, especially the time that I was there, maybe it was okay to say, hey, yeah, this is acceptable, even though it shouldn't be. Now, and one of my early hope was these types of things wouldn't happen in the United States. So I was proved wrong so many times, especially in the last 6-7 years. And things happens, and now this is one of them. Because why it's kind of disappointing is the public opinion on this issue. And now, of course, the social media is so powerful. And everyone who's not really licensed to be there, they're there. In my opinion, like, people should have a license to use the social media, especially X, and probably X more than anything. It's so many crazy things happening, and so many. Like, you may have a group of 5,000 people who really hate something, and they can actually take over the attention. And they can become the focus. They can be the trend. So the TT they call. Now, this is a 26-year-old, relatively good looking, but many people think that he's better looking than I think he is. Well educated. And then he killed someone. And this person is the married guy, father of two. And it happened to be the CEO of insurance company, United Health. And what we have seen is how crazy some of the people were just because of the way that he looks and the way that who he is. Now, he maybe shouldn't be guilty. So they almost kind of like pardon him, like, hey, like, you're well educated and wealthy and really good looking, so like it's okay for you to kill. So this is one of the issues why this became a big problem for us. And now they are looking for a death penalty, perhaps. So there's like two different extreme sides, I guess. And when it comes to the legal issue, this is where we needed you the most. So if you can tell us why this is so important and how this captured the public's interest, what makes this case more special, and from the legal point, and as being a lawyer, how did you feel about this when you first heard this?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll get to the legal issues in a moment, and I can speak to them with a little bit more legal expertise. When it comes to why this has captivated public interest, that's going to be, I think, more of an opinion than sort of a legal expertise area, because who can really say why these things go viral on social media, or what makes these things, or what makes somebody gain this sort of cult-like status like Luigi Magione has? But I would say there are a number of issues at play here. So first of all, you have a pretty high-profile victim. Now, Brian Thompson, nobody knew who he was by name,
Right.
but people know what United Healthcare is. And he's the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company, and there are, I think, a lot of Americans right now who are frustrated with the state of healthcare in this country. And United Healthcare was already facing criticism about things like how it was handling patient claims. So we have this victim, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form condoning what Mangione did. Let me make that crystal clear from the top. But we have this victim, and it was also almost like something from a movie, the way it all played out. It happens in Midtown Manhattan. It was very early in the morning, but it was during the day. And then there are these bullet casings with delay, deny, and depose on them. So I just think that this was almost like created in a lab to capture the public's interest. And then there is this picture of this suspect at large, that picture that everybody saw where Mangione's lower half is revealed, and he's smiling at, I think, a barista. And it was just like the jokes almost write themselves at that point. You know, people are saying, oh, well, of course he's going to get caught because he had to pull his mask down to flirt with a barista.
Right, that's how it started.
So we have all of these elements in play. And then when Mangione actually does get arrested, I think that, well, he's young, he's attractive. I think the extent of that attractiveness, opinions can vary, as
Right.
you made
Well, I mean,
very
he's
clear.
a decent-looking person. I'm not taking that away from him. It's just not. I mean, he's not like Brad Pitt, or I mean, he's a good-looking guy. But I think maybe we have this term, and then my physicians may be upset. We could say, hey, he's good-looking for a doctor, or she's beautiful for a doctor. So for whatever reason, our expectations a little bit lower because they studied too hard. So for murder, I guess he's a good-looking guy, right? So we're not taking that away from him, but I don't think he's all that. But one of the other thing that becomes more problematic, I think, is education. Like, he's from one of the best schools in the world, right? So now, but going back to the look, and I want to let you kind of continue on that. So would that be for public to form their opinion? Would that be enough? Because there would be a lot of other good-looking people or beautiful ladies, then they're going to go out and then kill.
No, I don't think that just being good looking is going to be the be-all and end-all when it comes to captivating the public interest like this case did. Although certainly it doesn't hurt. I mean, you can even look at, like, Ted Bundy comes to mind, where he had women writing him letters in prison, this notorious serial killer, but was a good-looking guy. And I do agree there's certain levels of good-looking, so I don't know that I've ever used the expression good-looking for a murderer, but I'll keep that one in my back pocket. But not Hollywood attractive, but good-looking for just your everyday average person. And then I do think that there were people now, I think, are pretty savvy and sophisticated when it comes to feeling like they're being manipulated by the press. So then on top of all of that, Luigi Magione, he's caught in Pennsylvania, then he's extradited to New York, and there's this picture that I think a lot of people took to be like a photo op, where he's coming off this helipad and he's just flanked by police officers. The mayor is there. And I think that also kind of incited some ire in certain people, where they're like, look, I feel like I'm being manipulated here, that I'm supposed to dislike this person.
Right.
And that the reaction to that was to push back even more.
True. Actually, when I saw the mayor of New York, I'm like, why was he there? I mean, well, he has his own legal issues he was dealing at that time. I'm like, do we really need to see that scene? Yes, we need to make certain things. Perhaps it needs to be so maybe visible to everyone, but when you are presenting it that way, it almost made him like a hero, like.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
by himself, and there's like 100 police officers trying to protect or intimidate the person. Actually, what do you think? That's like intimidation or protecting?
I think that it was more to be intimidating than to be protecting.
But that probably triggered a lot of people's attention to say, hey, well, this is like a Batman or one of the other superheroes.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that he's looked at now by some people as almost a Robin Hood figure or like a folk hero.
Right. So now the decision on this case, either, like let's say, we wouldn't be all fully surprised if he's not guilty, and also we wouldn't be surprised if he's guilty, right? Like both can happen.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that this is about as clear-cut, premeditated as you can get. I mean, he had to figure out Brian Thompson's his schedule. He had to get a silencer. He had to write on the bullet casings. And I haven't heard anyone say that they think he didn't actually do it. I think everybody is pretty much on board that, yeah, this guy, he did it. Now, whether somebody could find him not guilty, that did bring up one of the topics that I wanted to discuss, which was this notion of jury nullification. Is that a term you're familiar with at all?
Not really.
So would it happen in this scenario? I don't know. But the concept of jury nullification would be if you had jurors. Well, first of all, this is a high-profile case. So it's going to be incredibly challenging to find unbiased jurors. But that's the nature of the beast. I mean, there are these high-profile cases, and we do the best we can, putting together a jury pool. You could, in theory, have a juror, and it would only take one, who would listen to all of the evidence, who would say, yeah, I think the prosecution has met its burden. I think that this guy is guilty under the law, but I'm going to say he's not guilty anyway. And that's the idea of jury nullification. So even if I, as a juror, think that the prosecution has met its burden, I can't get in trouble if I say not guilty anyway, because, first of all, how would you prove it? How would you prove what's going on in my mind? And second of all, that's just part of the process. And then it could theoretically end in a hung jury. Could he be found not guilty? I mean, look, anything is possible, but I think that would be really difficult to come back not guilty.
So, but if there's this support in public, because right now I think there are over $1 million donations to help him with the legal stuff, which one of the things that never made sense in this one, his parents, his family is probably over $1 billion family, one of those well-established families. So, I mean, he shouldn't have some of these financial difficulties. And we have seen that in his education, even in his high school. And then all of a sudden, since June 2024, he's gone. No contact with his family. And in November, I believe, they actually filed a missing person report. And there's some stuff still doesn't make sense to me. Like the place that he lived in, even what was that term, that place, not the hotel, but then
Was he living in a hostel? I'm not.
A hostel, yeah.
Okay.
So like there's like 6-7 people sharing a room. Well, this person he should be able to afford just buying a place in Hawaii and anywhere else in the world. He actually promoted the book from this guy, the writer, the author, the Indian guy. I can't remember the name. We covered this a couple months ago. Did a lot of weird stuff, but this financial stuff never made sense. And his family actually owns a nursing home. So they're healthcare providers in a way. If anything is wrong in healthcare, that they were participating in that. So there's something went off. But then still, when people are saying that, hey, I'm going to put $50 for this guy's legal defense case, well, like, he may not need this because his family probably is going to cover that anyway, right? So, but people are still doing it. So when you have that much opinion, public opinion, and if, let's say, if they go with the death penalty, do you think there will be any outrage?
If he is given the death penalty, yes, I do think there will be outrage. And the death penalty is an interesting topic here because, well, first of all, I think some people are a little bit confused as to how Magione is facing federal and state charges.
Right.
So he has been charged in New York and Pennsylvania and federally. And typically when you have a murder, it's something that's handled in state court.
Mm-hmm.
So he is facing these state charges in New York, but then also because he crossed state lines, there's a federal element to this. And part of, I think, the ire surrounding the death penalty being at play here is the fact that people think it's politicized. So if we look at this recent history of the federal death penalty, in 2021, then U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland put a moratorium on the death penalty at the federal level. He's like, we're not going to have any more federal cases that end with a death penalty. And it's pretty rare, in fact, to have the death penalty used in a federal case. And then right before he left office, then President Biden he didn't pardon, but he commuted the sentence of, I believe there were 37 people who were on death row that he decided, you know what, I'm just going to switch that, and they're just going to have life sentences now. Mm-hmm. There were 3 people that still are on death row at the federal level. One is the remaining brother at the Boston Marathon bombings. One is, I can't remember his name, but he committed mass murder at a synagogue. And the other one is Dylan Roof, who murdered all of those people who are worshiping at the historically black church. Mm-hmm. So under Biden, the idea was that the death penalty is only going to be used in these instances of terrorism or mass crime with a basis in, I'll say, hatred. Mm-hmm. And then when Donald Trump entered office, it was, I believe, his first day in office, he signed an executive order saying, hey, we're bringing the death penalty back at the federal level. Didn't give a lot of detail as to when the death penalty would be used, but 2 of the things in this executive order were that it would be used when somebody has killed a law enforcement officer or when somebody, what was the other one? So, when somebody who is undocumented has committed a capital offense. Mm-hmm. And Luigi Magione doesn't fall into either of those boxes. So now we have
terrorism. Actually, they are bringing the terrorism on this one, on his case, right?
It's a state level. So in New York, after 9/11, they passed these.
Oh, I see.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, and I actually have the language here somewhere in my notes. So it's an underlying offense in New York. So you don't get just this anti-terrorism count. It's if you commit a crime, this can be sort of tacked onto that crime to make the charges a little bit steeper. And it's done if there's a crime that's done with intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. So there is even backlash to that, where people are like, does this really rise to the level of terrorism?
Right.
But that's separate from the death penalty issue.
I see. Now, so how does this case reflect on a broader issue in the legal system? That's my kind of last question on this topic. So it's, again, we are talking about it's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact. There will be people who are going to be really unhappy. But from my point, we are in business for more than 20 plus years. There may be one of the incidents where we actually sued one of the companies, but we never got into. We didn't initiate any lawsuits because it's costly. It's very difficult to work on those cases, even if we have lawyers and the legal team supporting, the administration needs to be involved. But there are some companies who went after, even if they were not in the great position to have a legal case, they still did. And there were some disappointments that I knew that, hey, this wasn't right. So these are all business cases. I'm like, why did this happen? Like, well, because I'm seeing now, after so many years, how the legal system actually is not broken. It's just like how it works is what you are providing, how much you are providing, and then you also need to be okay with the decision, regardless of it's favorable to you or not. So not everyone is at the same maturity, of course. So then they're going to see if someone is disappointed with the decision, and if they can find enough people, they will go out and protest. So what do we expect from this case in terms of the more like a legal, broader legal issues? Do you think it will have any impact? Are we going to forget about this? That's the other thing.
Did you just say, are we going to forget about this?
Yeah, after this is done, and then he's like Menendez brothers. It was actually, I should maybe share that with you. So when I watched the Netflix show for Menendez brothers, that's where I felt like this is one of the reasons that I got more interested in this, other than the guy being in the healthcare. So you look at the show, and I'm 51 years old when I'm watching that with a different view. But if I'm 16 years old, I'm watching this because there's a lot of things that would grab someone's attention. And then all of a sudden you see they're almost victimizing these people who killed their parents. And there's discussions, hey, should we actually, is it enough for them? Should we get them out? All those stuff. If one of the brother wasn't stupid enough, they could have been out of actually jail by now. So this is taking to the next level. It's almost like there's already enough support. Hey, like there's $1 million for legal bills. I mean, imagine like if someone is paying for your legal bills and they're able to get 1 million, that's a lot of support. So do you think that would have any impact in the legal system, like in terms of people believing in the legal system itself?
I don't pretend to know much about the Menendez brothers case, but I can see some clear distinctions there between what happened with the Menendez brothers and what happened with Luigi Magione. So with the Menendez brothers, there's this underlying sexual abuse component. And there were 2 trials involved in that case. And I believe the first trial was a hung jury. And then there was a second trial where the brothers weren't permitted to bring in any information related to the alleged sexual abuse. And there are just issues there that are not in the Luigi Magione case that I think really separate the two. I mean, no matter how this shakes out, there are going to be people on both sides who are going to be disappointed, who are going to be outraged.
Right.
I find it hard to fathom that he won't be found guilty at some level, no matter what public opinion is, no matter how much social media support he's given, because I have yet to hear of any mitigating circumstance that would lessen his charges the way the Menendez brothers have. Now, I did mention the jury nullification, so it is theoretically possible that you could have jurors, or even one juror, who, regardless of the facts, will just say, you know what, I'm going to find this person not guilty, no matter what the evidence says. And maybe I'm putting too much faith in the system.
I think we should.
I find it hard to fathom that could happen. Will he get the death penalty? I think that's unlikely. But there are just so many charges. He's got charges in New York. He's got charges in Pennsylvania. He has federal charges. The idea that he could be found not guilty just across the board, I just don't foresee that happening.
So now, since you are going to be part of the show long term, so we are going to probably discuss this again. And then there's any new stuff. I think there will be more things in the next 3-4 weeks. Now, I want to bring us up, bring our next topic, Roe v. Wade. Now, this is where I'm going to disclaim that I don't know much about it. And we wanted to discuss this because we are in healthcare, it's important, and it's you are also very knowledgeable on this, specifically, I assume. Now, this is what I know so far. Well, of course, we know the term very well because it was all over the news. Now, the problem is this. If you are watching certain channels, you are getting your news in different ways. And And many people, they don't read anymore. So they look at the headlines, they're like, oh. And then if they have a political opinion, you can be guilty, but if you are on my side, it's okay. So that's, you are much younger than I am. So you'll probably remember this. Like what I have seen is in time, you can't really change someone's opinion on, especially if there's any political ties into the topic like this. So you are X, you are going to support X people, you are Y, you are going to support Y people. And I think this is one of those. Now, I find myself in the, like I try to be independent from these issues, but even, if I say I'm fully independent, that wouldn't be the truth. So now this started in 1971 by a woman named Norma McCorvey, and she actually couldn't use her name with the pseudonymy Jane Rose, started this legal case, and someone was able to take this at that time seriously. And in 1973, it became the law, and this actually gives the woman the constitutional right to have an abortion. Now, because this is something that we want, your opinion and your insight, if you can kind of summarize what this is, what really happened, what was it before 1971, what happened after this became the constitutional law, and then I guess 2022 things changed. So if we can kind of summarize that historical part.
Sure, and I'm hoping to do this from just a factual basis and trying to keep personal opinions out of it as much as possible, because I know this is such a hot button topic and it's been that way for decades and decades. But you are correct. So if you think about the time period, the late 60s, early 70s, it's like the height of the civil rights movement. There's a lot of moving pieces. People are getting, I would say, more progressive. And there were these two attorneys, Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey. And this was very calculated, I think it's fair to say, on their part. They wanted to take on abortion. So they specifically sought out somebody. This was in Texas. So there was a law on the books saying that abortion was illegal except to save the life of the mother. And these two attorneys were seeking out somebody who was pregnant so they could try to challenge this law. And they found, you are correct, Norma McCorvey. They were specifically looking for somebody who was young, who was, I'll just say poor, for lack of a better term, and somebody who was white, because they thought that that would help kind of engender more compassion. I mean, you have to think of the time period that we were in. So they sued on the lower level because there's a process to get up to the Supreme Court. And they ended up in front of the Supreme Court. And it was a pretty progressive court at that time. So they looked at the issue of abortion. I will say it was an all-male court. And they were looking at substantive due process as it is in the 5th and 14th Amendments. And tell me if I start to get in the weeds on this, and I don't pretend to be a constitutional scholar whatsoever. But substantive due process, it allows courts to protect certain fundamental rights from government interference, even if they're not enumerated in the Constitution. Let me try to break that down a little bit more. Again, this is bird's eye view. We have the Constitution. It's not a long document. There are The Bill of Rights has 10 amendments after it, and then there are amendments that have been added since then.
Sure.
The 9th Amendment is almost sort of like a catch-all that says even if we haven't specifically stated something is a constitutional right, that doesn't mean that it can't be found to be a constitutional right. So looking at that, and then looking at substantive due process in the 14th Amendment, the court inferred that there is a right to privacy. And baked into that right to privacy is a right to be free from government interference in making medical decisions. And that right to privacy, that had already been used previously in other cases, in particular Griswold v. Connecticut, which made it so it legalized contraception.
Okay.
So the courts, they looked at that, they determined there was a right to privacy, and that as long as a fetus wasn't viable, and they were looking at it in terms of trimesters, a woman has a person with a uterus, I guess, I want to be inclusive, has a constitutional right to be able to terminate a pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. So prior to that, 1971, if this was not legal, that the abortion was not legal, we cannot really say that it was not happening.
Yes, that's very true.
Okay, so we're going to come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
So now this change in 2022?
Well, in the early 90s, in 1992, in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, so there was a little bit of a chipping away at Roe versus Wade in the early 90s with Planned Parenthood v. Casey. So this was a case coming out of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had enacted this law that really limited access to abortion, including things like a 24-hour waiting period, minors needed consent of their parents, and importantly, that a woman couldn't get an abortion without her husband's permission.
Okay.
So that case went before the Supreme Court. And that court was a little less progressive, although it did finally have a woman on it, Sandra Day O'Connor, although she was a pretty conservative judge.
Mm-hmm.
And that court said, well, you know what? This law, as it's written, stands, except for a woman needing to get her husband's permission to get an abortion. They said that's can't happen because it could be dangerous if the woman's in a situation with domestic violence or something like that. We're going to strike that part of the law. But the rest of it, it can stand as written. And they made it a little bit easier for states to enact laws against abortion by creating what they called the undue burden test. So a state can have a law relating to reproductive rights as long as it doesn't create an undue burden on a person seeking to terminate their pregnancy. And that's a pretty vague term. It can mean a lot of things. It can be interpreted a lot of ways. And they also hammered home the idea of viability. So after the point of viability, states, because of the interest that they have in the mother's health and in the fetus's, I'll say, personhood, they could enact legislation not allowing for an abortion after the point of viability. That's another thing that has changed over time. When is a fetus viable outside of the womb? With modern medicine, that is becoming earlier and earlier.
Now, this has a different impact in Delaware. So can we actually kind of summarize what happened, how Delaware actually legal system responded to this decision from 2022 again?
So 2022 is the Dobbs decision, and that's where the court looked at this and they said, you know what, this right to privacy, it doesn't include abortion because abortion is not deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition. And see, I'm kind of rambling on about this, so I'll try to be really concise with Dobbs. So with Dobbs, the court looked at this and said, the right to privacy, all right, fine, that still exists. And the majority, when Alito drafted his majority opinion, he's like, look, you have a right to privacy. That right to privacy, that's how the court weighed on issues in for contraception, legalizing interracial marriage, legalizing same-sex marriage. So that's been used a lot throughout the years with these societal issues. So they're like, we're not saying those things are off the table, but the abortion thing, nah. But Clarence Thomas, he did draft a concurring opinion where he said, look, I think that the substantive due process, I don't think that the court should be involved in that whatsoever. I think that that's overstepping things. So all that is to say that now states are free to make abortion illegal should they choose to do so. Bringing us to Delaware, in response to that, they codified Roe versus Wade. And then there's also been some more recent legislation that I think is topical. So very recently, then Governor Carney signed some legislation into law. There were two pieces of legislation in particular, and I want to make sure I get this correct. So the first is a bill sponsored by House Majority Leader Melissa Minor Brown that makes it so that insurance plans, including Medicaid, are required to pay for pregnancy termination. And then there is another piece of legislation sponsored by now Lieutenant Governor Kyle Evans Gay that mandates that colleges and university with student health centers have to provide medication, abortions, and emergency contraception to students.
So the federal law versus the state, is Delaware protected from that? Like, how is the decision going to be made if something happens against the federal decision, federal court decision? So are we independent from the federal court?
So as of right now, where it stands, what the Supreme Court has done in overruling Roe versus Wade is put it back in the hands of the state. They said, we are not going to say that it is federally a constitutionally protected thing that a woman has the right to terminate a pregnancy. So that means that states like Delaware are free to enact their own legislation, either protecting reproductive rights, like states like Delaware have done, or denying reproductive rights, like many other states in the South in particular have done. Now, should the federal government decide to pass federal legislation banning abortion, well, then because of the supremacy clause, Delaware would have to fall in line and would have to follow the federal law. But that law, as of right now, does not exist.
So right now it is what are the terms of the abortion, like the legal abortion in Delaware, like just in simple terms?
What are
So
the
like
terms?
this is not my expertise. So and I tried to kind of ask the questions for everyone to really understand. Like if someone who's 7.5 months pregnant,
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
no issues with the baby, no issues with the mother, and mother doesn't want to have the baby anymore at 7.5 months, can they have a legal abortion in Delaware?
No. So in Delaware right now, as the law stands, you can terminate a pregnancy up to the point of viability. And the point of viability means the point where a fetus can survive outside of the womb. So I would say that's probably around 24 weeks right now.
22, 24.
22, 24 weeks.
Yes.
Like I said, as modern medicine has advanced, that the point of viability has moved back. Other than that, the only way you can terminate a pregnancy is if it's in the case where the mother's life is in danger, or if there's like a fetal abnormality where the fetus isn't going to live outside of the womb. It's not like, if there's something genetically, I don't want to say wrong, but something atypical with the fetus, you can't just terminate the pregnancy then. It has to be, I think I have the language right here. In the event of a fetal anomaly for which there is not a reasonable likelihood of the fetus sustained survival outside of the uterus without extraordinary medical measures. So essentially, if the baby can't survive outside of the womb.
So we had a client several years ago, OBGYN, and actually right before our session, I was talking to a couple of our people here in the office, and one of them reminded me of this. There was a mother who was pregnant, but she had 5 kids already, and then mother's life was in danger, and she shouldn't continue with the pregnancy, but she did, and she died. And then now, I don't know if the kid survived, but those 5 kids didn't have a mother, and they were all little, most likely. So there's one side of that is talking about those types of situations, and then there's the other side where we are looking at the late in pregnancy, which we are saying that this is after certain weeks, 22, 23, whatever that week is. After that, that's already limited. So now, can I have the same abortion in Mississippi right now?
I can't speak as to what all of the state's laws are right now,
Like one of
but
the
in Mississippi, I can speak to Mississippi because Mississippi was the state in the Dobbs decision. So Mississippi passed legislation. I don't know if it was completely outlawing abortion, but it might have putting like a 6-week abortion ban into place or something, which is effectively an abortion ban.
So, and I'm going to kind of dramatize the example. So if I have a 15-year-old child who somehow got involved with a 27-year-old drug addict, and we live in Mississippi, and she's pregnant. I'm the father of the 15-year-old. My daughter is pregnant, and with a drug addict, a lot of issues. Now, in Mississippi, that person cannot have an abortion.
I want to be wary of talking about other states that I don't practice in, where I
like
don't know the
states,
law.
like
but
the state that's supported by this overturn. Maybe.
let me kind of, this is going to be a little bit of speculation, I think. But okay, so first of all, some of these states, they do have provisions in place in the case of rape or incest. A 15-year-old and a 27-year-old could potentially be considered statutory rape. I don't know what the law is in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So potentially, maybe, there could be a claim that this was rape. I think that the real world scenarios that we've seen have made it seem like even people who are pregnant as a result of rape are having a hard time obtaining abortions in some of these states. So I would hazard, I don't want to say guess, I think it would be highly unlikely in that scenario that that 15-year-old would be permitted to get an abortion in Mississippi with the laws on the books in Mississippi at this time. I feel comfortable saying that.
So one thing that I want to kind of point out, the decision is made by the court, right? So that this decision of overturn is made by the court, and this is the Supreme Court. So then, and these judges in there are politically, they're political figures because they're appointed by the presidents, right? That time's president. So then there's this overlapping. So then someone is maybe, these are life term.
It is a life term, and now in the case of, say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she ended up dying, but you also can retire, and we've seen that happen, like with Kennedy.
I think the point is, like, there would be people, there will be a mix of people who were appointed by Bill Clinton, and then someone is appointed by George Bush, and then now at some point, if the majority is appointed by Republicans or majority is appointed by Democrats, this is a political decision, right?
Yes, I feel comfortable saying that this is
and
political.
in Delaware, it's similar because our Delaware court is who are making this decision. That's also like if we have a blue state and a decision is on the Republican side, there will be a clash. But then if they leave the state alone, I guess, so it may not be a huge problem for us. But then now we are going to have some people who are going to travel from other states here to get an abortion.
Certainly, yes.
Potentially, right.
Yes, I don't even think potentially. I think that is already happening.
Happening.
That there are people in states where they cannot obtain abortion who are traveling to other states.
Sure.
And as of right now, as far as I know, that is not illegal. As to whether or not certain states are going to make that illegal, where you are no longer allowed to leave the state, obtain an abortion, and come back, we'll see.
Well, so I just want to go back to my, remember I said I'm going to come back to this. Before 1971, abortion was illegal, but it was happening.
Yes.
Where was it happening? Underground businesses. Illegally, it was happening. Maybe in the really bad conditions, it was happening. Now, you may be surprised by this one, but in Turkey, it's legal. Turkey is a 99% Muslim country. You would think that it wouldn't be legal in Turkey from the religious belief standpoint. And it has, of course, some criteria. But when we don't actually let this, don't let this happen in the legal framework, this is just going to become a bigger problem. And it's going to be not almost like the marijuana smokers. Like it used to be a huge crime before. People would lose their school scholarship, and then they would lose their jobs. And then today we are legalizing it because doing it in the controlled environment is better than doing it illegally. So in this case, there are two issues. One is the decision. Who's going to make that decision? Is that the person who's pregnant, or is it the people who are sitting on the other side of the bench? that's an issue. I'm like, as much as possible, I'm not, promoting abortion, so I can just tell you that, but as much as possible. But the scenario that I give you, the 15-year-old example, I would want to have an abortion for my child. I'll give you another example. So I can say this comfortably because I do have an opinion on this one. I'm pro-life, but to a limit. So if I know that the child is going to be mentally challenged from the early on, even maybe even later on, that's not an easy decision to say, no, I want to keep it. I mean, that's, those are the decisions that should be left to the individuals because those terms, those conditions that person is going to live through. So, and I think the state and the federal government can, just my humble opinion, providing this legal framework is kind of the key, and then having the people who are licensed to do these things in a safe conditions, that's going to be the key. And now when you are saying that, hey, you are pregnant, you can just go to the state, you can cross the state line, and then, I mean, Delaware is like 3 miles to, like if you are in Wilmington, it's 4 miles to the PA, 2 miles to New Jersey.
But Delaware is, I think, unique because it is so small.
But it would be a problem, like if someone is not, if it was the other way around, like someone has to leave
the middle of Texas,
right,
where do you go?
Right, that's true. That's the other extreme. So from the Delaware standpoint, did we miss anything? Did you want to cover anything?
No, I will say that if you look at the data right now, 94% of pregnancy terminations in this country occur in the first 13 weeks, and they're medicated, not surgical. So I think that the data supports that these sort of what people have dubbed late-term pregnancy or late-term abortions aren't really happening, except in cases where there is extenuating circumstances. And maybe I can come back someday and we can talk some more about specific women, because I do have a couple of instances with specific women in some of these states with really restrictive abortion bans who have passed away. But I think our time is running short, so I'll save that for another day.
One of the nice things for today is the start. So we'll be building up our topics, and in time to time we have to come back to those.
Sure.
Well, hopefully, as your first session, this was a good session. Was it better than you were expecting? How do you feel now?
Well, I was very nervous before we started, but you were you made me feel very comfortable the entire time, and it went by very quickly. I can't say the same for the people watching it, but for me, it went quickly.
Well, honestly, when I look at these things, I want to see if there's any learning opportunity, me for personally, but also for others. And I think this would be one of the ones that most people are going to have a lot of interest and watch, because we are trying to provide what it is happening today with these topics as much as objectively as, without making it kind of like exaggerating. It's like everyone, like one of the issues that when we were discussing on the Magione issue is the approach was a problem. You may be doing the right thing, but if your execution is not right, then you are going to fail. So like having 200 people behind this guy didn't intimidate him. It almost made him a hero. So that's the execution. So in this one, we try to kind of give this as objective as possible. There may be people who are, not agreeing with what we are talking about. I always say we are not selling ice cream or pizza, so we have only certain things available. So, and we are not here to make everyone happy. But I enjoy a lot with this discussion, and thank you for being part of the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week with another guest, and then our Bariatric Friday is going to happen in the next 5-6 minutes. Dr. Erkan should be here soon. We'll see you guys shortly. Thank you. There, so you can let me know when it's time.